Hi, I'm Carly, and I was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer when I was 37. I was actually on a chemo ward with my big sister when I first found my swelling under my armpit. It was really painful. I really remember it well. It was a Friday morning. My older sister was going through chemo at the time for a late stage ovarian cancer diagnosis. After her diagnosis, she'd found out that she was a BRCA1 gene mutation carrier. So I was going through supporting her, and I remember being on this chemo ward and then feeling this very painful feeling under my armpit and going to check, and there was a really big swelling, and just thinking, oh gosh, what are the chances of, finding something like that on a chemo ward? I didn't think much of it though. I really did think pain would be okay, but because of where we were, because of the fact that clearly there is BRCA on my dad's side of the family, and then also because my mum, we don't share the same mum. My mum had died of breast cancer 10 years earlier, and her mum had breast cancer. So there was all of this stuff that came together to make me act really, really quickly. And I called the GP that day and managed to get an appointment that day. They then booked me in for an ultrasound, and the following Friday I was told I had breast cancer, and it's probably the first time I'd heard the term triple negative breast cancer at that point. And so when we went into the little area where they were going to get her bloods, I just said to her immediately, I was like, Ems, I've just found something, will you have a feel? So she felt it, and it really was just this it felt like a golf ball under my armpit. And she was like, oh yeah, I definitely get that checked out, but let's speak to my nurse, because I'd got to know her nurse quite well at the time. So then she got her nurse in and said, oh, will you just feel something my sister's just found? So actually I had a chemo nurse feel and say everything I've just said to you, I would get that checked. She was like, I'm sure it's fine, but because there's BRCA in your family, because of your mum's history, just be really safe and go and get it checked. And I was pretty aware of, checking and signs and symptoms as it was, because of my mum dying of breast cancer literally 10 years earlier. I was already doing stuff for breast cancer awareness. It had been Breast Cancer Awareness Month the month before I found this swelling. I'd been with loads of other women in Notting Hill in pink bras, doing an awareness shoot. So I kind of knew what I was looking for, and I knew underarm, that was an area to be careful about. And actually I remember being in one of my chemos and talking to one of my nurses and saying, because at one point me and my sister were actually on the same chemo regime, and I was saying oh, my sister's in another hospital having chemo today, I'm here having chemo, just how crazy is that? And she said, you'd be surprised, it's actually I've treated mums and daughters before, fathers and children at the same time. So yeah, it was a crazy time. One of the signs that maybe not enough people are aware of is that it isn't always a pea-sized lump breast cancer. For me, there actually was no lump to feel. I just had this swelling of my lymph nodes, and that is because the cancer had obviously spread to my lymph nodes in my armpit. But my primary breast cancer, the tumour was too far in, so I wouldn't have been able to feel that by hand until it had obviously grown or spread more. So I feel very, very lucky that in a way it did spread to my lymph nodes, because that was, the day I felt it, I went and got it checked. So it did, I'm hoping we were able to at that point stop it in its tracks, obviously, by acting very quickly at that point. Obviously, I then learned lots about triple negative breast cancer, that it's aggressive. It had already travelled to my armpit, right? So I was diagnosed stage 2, and that in breast cancer is still an early stage. So I think I feel oddly lucky. I found it on a chemo ward and was kind of told to take it seriously, and I did. You know, I definitely feel like I knew maybe more than some of my friends I've met since my diagnosis about breast cancer. I'd witnessed my mum go through primary breast cancer treatment, then to get her recurrence, and then obviously to see her die from it. Her breast cancer was hormone positive, so she got to take the drugs after her primary treatment finished to suppress her estrogen and things like that. So I feel like even though I kind of knew there was different breast cancers, I definitely didn't feel like I knew what triple negative breast cancer meant. And so it was a quick learning curve when I heard those words. And I think I very quickly, I didn't know I was a BRCA1 carrier the day I was diagnosed, but it very quickly was looking like that. So, my sister, having found out 5 months earlier that it's in our family, I hadn't got around to testing. I was hoping to, but hadn't got around to testing myself. So when I was told that it was breast cancer, they very much treated me as though it was going to be because of being a BRCA1 carrier, because triple negative breast cancer, I learnt, is more prevalent if you are a BRCA1 gene carrier. Yeah. The ultrasound showed something. There was obviously the swelling, and then it showed something, but I think I had quite dense breasts. So he very much was like, your breasts have got all these cysts and things, and it's likely going to be okay. But what they've seen and biopsied, I'll let you know. He said, I'll call you. And I think him saying, I'll call you, was very much to reassure me that he really did think it was going to be okay. So I got told that I had breast cancer over the phone. I was in Brent Cross shopping centre buying batteries. It was the day before my little girl's 4th birthday. So I was buying batteries for her presents. At that point, I just remember him saying, it actually really, really was like you imagine in just kind of, I guess, what you imagine. I couldn't understand what he was saying. As soon as he said, I'm sorry, it's cancer, I was so grateful to be with my friend, because I actually just had to give her the phone. So I was like, I can't understand what he's saying anymore. So I just went into complete shock, and she wrote some notes down, and I still have them. And it said small breast cancer, because my primary tumour was quite small, which goes to show that triple negative breast cancer is aggressive, because it was spreading even though the primary breast tumour was small. So that day, obviously, grouped together, saw my husband, had to tell him how terrible, and then best friends, grouping together. And I remember just thinking constantly, well, it's a small breast cancer, so maybe I'm not going to need chemo, it's small. But I didn't know anything about triple negative breast cancer at that point. And actually, obviously, the fact that it was in my armpits, and with triple negative breast cancer and with chemo, often they will give it to you first just to halt it. So there was so much I learned very quickly. And I went to see my surgeon that evening with my husband. To the day he called me, we were called in, and he very much was like, this is an aggressive breast cancer. It is small and it is early, but because it's aggressive, we treat it aggressively. You hear that, and just suddenly, I'm thinking of my kids, 4 and 6. I'm going to need chemo. I've just watched my sister going through chemo. And he also said at that point, you will most likely need a radical surgery. You remember the words exactly that are used. So I'm very grateful to my team that they said what they needed to say, but in a way that I was able to take it on board at that point. But I do remember what they said. Aggressive, we treat it aggressively, you're going to need a radical surgery. And then it was very much then we'll assess. We don't know radiotherapy, we don't know, all of that stuff was a conversation, but you're taking on so much information. He said to me, it's likely you'll need a radical surgery because we are going to treat this as though you've got BRCA1, the BRCA1 mutation. I was 37. They would consider that young in terms of getting breast cancer. So, and it was triple negative. Well, at that point, it was looking like it was triple negative from the biopsy, what he'd got back. So what he meant by that was that I would need a double mastectomy, because if by carrying the BRCA1 gene mutation, my prevalence of getting breast cancer, even if they treat, my breast cancer was in my left side. So even if they treat that and gave me a single mastectomy or a lumpectomy, I guess because it had spread to my lymph nodes, it was always going to be a mastectomy. I still had a really high chance of it coming back in my right side. So that was what he said. And I kind of knew that would be what it was at that point, maybe because of my sister having BRCA, or suddenly you've got, being told you're going to meet with an oncologist. Like, you're just trying to get your head around how on earth do I have an oncologist? Like, what's going on? Talking to my kids, like, those were the things at that point that, even though he said radical surgery, it was very much like, okay, well, that's going to come after treatment, so let's just deal with this. I think I couldn't think about that. Because I'd been with my sister at so many of her chemos, and I was going on to the same drug as her to start with. I was having 12 weekly chemos to start with of paclitaxel and carboplatin, alongside immunotherapy, but that was exactly what my sister was on. So I felt oddly confident in a way that I would be okay with that chemo, because she was, I'd seen her, she'd had her bad days, and then she kind of started to get her energy back, and then managed to feel okay to go back into it. And she's just amazing, my sister, and she'd been really positive throughout. And I think it had demystified for me what chemo wards looked like. When my mum went through chemo, when she was first diagnosed, I was 22, which actually isn't that young, thinking about it now. But she didn't, as children, we didn't go with her to her treatments. I'd never been on a chemo ward until I was with my sister. So actually, that had made it feel more normal. So when it came to me going in, as odd as it was to be sitting in the chair, I was a bit like, oh, okay, it's actually okay. Like, we've played games on a chemo ward together. We've had snacks, we've laughed. Like, it was scary because these drugs are going into me and I don't know how I'm going to react and what side effects or how I'm going to feel. But in terms of actually having chemo, I felt very much like I'm okay with this. In some ways, and I don't love talking about this because I don't want to scare anybody, but my sister had, I think, 17 of this type of chemo, and she'd been absolutely fine. But on my second chemo, I had an anaphylactic reaction, which does go, and I say that laughing, it wasn't funny at all. It was obviously really scary and really serious. But I think what that did was just teach me very, very early on that even though we're on the same drugs, like, everything is your own individual path and story. I had hospitalizations because I had neutropenic sepsis. My sister never had that. So there was, different things going on for us. But I definitely think seeing how she had coped with her chemo was something that gave me that courage that I could too. Chemo for me was pretty brutal. However, it also showed me how strong we are. And I think often we don't give ourselves enough credit that we do have strength to get through some really tough things. Like I say, I had neutropenic sepsis. That was very problematic because it was just always a bit like, oh, am I going to be able to have it? And I really, really wanted it. That's the other thing, is like, you get told you're going to have 12 weekly chemos, and then I was having 4 AC chemos, which is lovingly called the Red Devil, which is always a, I don't know, not the greatest thing to be told you're putting into your body, because you think, oh, that doesn't sound very good. But I really wanted to have it all, and I wanted to give the cancer kind of being obliterated the best chance of that happening. And for me, I really felt like that was going to be chemo. I'd seen my sister, her cancer just, I think they described it as like melting away by the time the surgery had come, and she had a late stage diagnosis. So I went into that thinking chemo's going to work and it's going to completely clear all those cells, all the little cells that you can't see, it's all going to go. And so it was a bit of a mix of an experience, because I think about a month into being on chemo, I had a scan that showed that it was working. And so that's a real boost, right? So it just gave me that strength to keep on going, even though by the time I got to the end of chemo, I had cold cat to try and keep my hair. And I'm really grateful for those first 12 weeks, because I did feel, I could look in the mirror and I really did feel a bit more me. By the end of chemo, it was a very strange look I was sporting because I'd lost a lot of hair. But it's an amazing thing that is there for anyone that wants to, try and retain their hair. And I don't regret doing it. I had 6 months of chemo alongside immunotherapy. I was one of the earlier people to qualify for this immunotherapy because they'd been giving it to people with triple negative breast cancer late stage, and it had really good results, but they just passed it for early stage. So I felt really lucky at the very start of my treatment to be able to access like what people were saying was like a new wonder drug for triple negative breast cancer treatment. So after the 6 months of chemo, it then obviously shifted a gear into this radical surgery. Again, it was locked down, so I had to go into hospital alone, and it was August, and I was in hospital for a week with no visitors. I think my husband did come for half an hour one day. He begged and pleaded and had swabbed, and we'd been isolating anyway ahead of the surgery, so that was really much needed, I would say. But yeah, I was there for a week, and then not much time to recover before they kind of get you back into treatment. So I did need radiotherapy after, and they got me back onto the immunotherapy drug, which then carried on. So my treatment looked like 15 months from start to finish of pretty intense treatment. But again, because it's triple negative breast cancer and there is no drug at that point I could take, it felt like, let's throw the kitchen sink at this. Good luck is what it felt like. So actually when treatment finished, it was really, really like a hard time in many ways.